Rain poured over the empty streets of Palermo that night, as if the sky itself wanted to cry with her. Her dress clung to her skin, her hair was soaked, and her shoes made no sound on the wet pavement. She didn't know where to go or what she was running from anymore. Only that her heart hurt too much to keep pretending she was fine. When the headlights cut through the storm, she froze. A black car stopped in front of her. The door opened slowly. A man stepped out, tall, calm, dangerous without needing to move. He held out an umbrella, his voice low and steady. "Why does it feel like I've seen you before?" She lifted her eyes, trembling under the rain, and for a moment, time forgot how to breathe. She had no idea that the man offering her shelter was the same one whose life she had saved years ago. The man the city feared, the man she was destined to meet again. Years earlier, she worked at a small hospital near the docks, a place where no one asked too many questions. One night, they brought in a man shot twice in the chest, bleeding, unconscious. She was the only nurse on duty. Everyone else was afraid, but she didn't hesitate. Her hands trembled as she pressed the wound, whispering prayers no one heard. When he finally opened his eyes, he looked at her as if waking from death itself. The next morning, he was gone, without a name, without a goodbye. All he left behind was a broken wristwatch and a stain of blood that never washed out. She told herself it didn't matter, but she never forgot those eyes. Years passed, and everything she had built fell apart. Her job, her home, her faith in love. Now she wandered the streets again, a stranger to her own life. Sometimes, destiny doesn't knock twice. It waits in the rain. And if you've ever felt like life took everything from you just to bring one thing back, tell me in the comments, what did it take from you and what did it give in return? The sound of the rain against the glass echoed softly in the car. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, filled with the ghosts of words neither of them could say. She sat in the back seat, her fingers clutching her bag, eyes lost in the rhythm of the storm. The man beside her didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space between them like thunder about to strike. The city lights blurred outside the window, gold and blue reflections dancing on her wet cheeks. Every few seconds, she stole a glance at him, wondering who he was, why he had stopped for her, and why his face carried the same sadness she had seen once before. He noticed her trembling hands. Without a word, he turned off the air conditioning and opened the small heater vent toward her. She murmured a thank you, her voice barely audible. He drove through the narrow streets of Palermo until the car stopped in front of an old stone mansion. The kind of house that didn't just belong to the city, it commanded it. Iron gates opened slowly and guards stepped aside. Without question, she watched in quiet awe, realizing whoever he was, people feared him. When the car stopped, he got out first, walking around to open her door. She hesitated, afraid of stepping into a life she didn't understand. "It's only for the night," he said, his tone calm, almost gentle. "Until the storm ends." The rain had softened, but her fear hadn't. Still, she followed him. The marble floors reflected her reflection as they entered a grand hallway lit by dim chandeliers. Everything smelled faintly of old money, tobacco, and rain. A maid appeared, her expression cautious. "Signore, should I prepare a room?" He nodded, eyes never leaving the stranger who stood dripping on his floor. "Yes, the one near the library." As the maid hurried upstairs, the woman turned to him. "You don't have to do this. I'll leave in the morning." He looked at her with a strange mix of distance and fascination. "You can leave whenever you wish, but tonight you'll stay dry." She almost smiled, a flicker of disbelief breaking through her exhaustion. "Why did you stop for me?" she asked. He took a slow breath, glancing at the rain outside. "Because something told me not to keep driving." Their eyes met for the first time in the light. Her gaze was tired but honest. His, deep and searching, like someone who had spent years staring into darkness. For a moment it felt as if the world outside didn't exist, only the echo of rain and two broken souls who didn't know they were already connected by fate. The maid returned. "The room is ready, signore." He nodded again, then turned to her. "Go upstairs, first door on the right." She hesitated. "And you?" "I don't sleep much," he said simply. She followed the maid up the staircase, her wet shoes leaving faint prints on the marble. As she reached the landing, she turned back. He was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching the storm through the window. Inside the room, everything was warm. A fire burned quietly in the corner and a towel lay folded on the bed. She dried her hair, still unsure if she was safe. The house was too silent, too heavy with secrets. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. A woman worn out by time, by choices, by the weight of being alone. The face looking back wasn't the same one that once smiled in the hospital corridors, believing kindness could heal anything. She whispered to herself, "You shouldn't be here." But her heart whispered back, "You were meant to be." Downstairs the man poured himself a glass of whiskey. The golden liquid caught the light as he leaned against the piano. He didn't drink often anymore. He had promised someone once, someone who believed he could change. But tonight, the memory of her face under the rain had broken something open inside him. His assistant, Marco, entered quietly. "Boss, should we check her background?" He shook his head. "No, she's not a threat." Marco frowned. "You sure?" "No one stops on that road unless they're desperate or hiding." "I said no," he replied sharply, his tone final. When Marco left, he sat in silence again, staring at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight. The ticking felt louder than it should. He thought of her eyes, the same green that haunted a memory he had buried years ago, the night he almost died. The voice whispering, "Stay with me." He took the old wristwatch from the drawer, the same one the nurse had returned to him before he disappeared into the shadows. It was cracked, stained, but still ticking. He turned it over, tracing the faint initials on the back. LM. Could it be her? No, it couldn't. Life didn't tie knots so precisely. Upstairs she lay awake, unable to sleep. The sound of rain softened against the window, replaced by the soft hum of the city breathing below. Her thoughts drifted to that night years ago, the smell of antiseptic, the panic, the blood. The man whose pulse she refused to let fade. She remembered the watch, the initials, the way his hand had closed weakly around hers as she told him to hold on. Her breath caught. No, it couldn't be. But the voice, the eyes, they were the same. Tears welled up again, not from fear this time, but from the cruel symmetry of fate. What were the chances that the man she saved, the one she prayed had lived, was now the same man offering her shelter from a different storm? The door creaked. She turned sharply. The man stood at the threshold, silent. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said. "I just wanted to see if you needed anything." Her heart pounded. "You don't have to worry about me." "I'm not worried," he replied softly. "I'm curious." She swallowed hard. "About what?" He hesitated. "About the kind of woman who walks alone in the rain." She looked away toward the window. Maybe she walks alone because no one ever waited for her. He nodded slowly, something breaking in his eyes. Maybe she stopped waiting because she thought no one was worth it. Their silence became its own language, the kind spoken only between people who have lost too much to explain it. He finally said, "Rest. The rain will stop by morning." When he left, she sat on the edge of the bed, her pulse trembling with something she couldn't name. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a stranger, but as someone whose pain someone else recognized. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving behind the faint scent of wet earth and second chances. And somewhere between the echoes of thunder and the quiet of dawn, two stories that had once crossed in blood began to find their way back to each other. Sometimes, life brings back what we thought was gone, not to repeat the past, but to redeem it. If you believe that certain people are brought back into our lives for a reason, even when it hurts, share what you think that reason might be. The morning came quietly, dressed in pale sunlight and the smell of wet stone. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried the memory of last night's storm. She woke up slowly, unsure for a moment where she was. The room around her was far too elegant to belong to her life. Heavy curtains, golden frames, and a window overlooking a garden that looked more like a fortress than a home. She rose and walked toward the glass. Outside, men in black suits moved with precision, checking the perimeter, their faces stern and alert. The air was thick with authority, with danger. She understood then that the man who had saved her wasn't just powerful, he was feared. Downstairs, voices echoed faintly. She followed the sound until she reached a large dining room. He was there, sitting alone at a long wooden table, reading a newspaper. The morning light caught the sharp lines of his jaw, the stillness in his posture. He didn't look up when he spoke. "Sleep well?" She hesitated at the doorway. "I tried." He folded the paper carefully. "You didn't eat dinner. You should have something now." "I'm fine," she said softly. He finally looked at her. That's what people say when they're anything but fine. She sat at the far end of the table, uneasy under the weight of his calm. A maid brought coffee and fresh bread, placing them between them without a word. He watched her hands as she poured the coffee, the way they trembled slightly. He remembered that same tremor once, long ago, covered in blood instead of rain. "Do you always pick up strangers from the street?" she asked, forcing a faint smile. "No," he replied. "You're the first." "Then I should be honored." "It's not an honor," he said quietly. "It's a risk." She looked at him then, really looked at him. There was something in his eyes that didn't fit with his coldness. A flicker of sorrow, maybe, or exhaustion too deep to hide. "What do you do?" she asked. He hesitated, his gaze holding hers. "I fix things that other people break." It wasn't an answer. It was a confession disguised as one. The silence that followed was heavy, yet not uncomfortable. It felt like standing on the edge of a truth too dangerous to speak aloud. After breakfast, she wandered through the mansion. Each hallway told a story of wealth and loneliness, portraits of people who looked powerful but unhappy. One painting caught her attention, a woman with dark hair and distant eyes, wearing a necklace that looked familiar. "She was my mother." His voice came from behind her. She turned. He was standing there, closer than she expected. "She looks sad," she said. "She was," he answered simply. "She never liked this house, said it felt like a prison." "Do you?" He paused, studying the portrait. "Some prisons have golden walls." There was something haunting about the way he said it, as if he'd lived his whole life behind those walls and forgot how freedom felt. Later that day, a man in a black suit approached him in the hall. "Boss, we found the one responsible for last night's shipment. Should we handle it?" She froze when she heard the word. "Boss." He noticed her reaction and dismissed the man with a nod. When they were alone, she whispered, "Boss?" He met her eyes without flinching. "You shouldn't listen to things that don't concern you." "Hard not to," she replied, "especially when I might be living under the same roof as whatever you are." He stepped closer, not in threat, but in clarity. "Whatever I am, I kept you safe last night. That's all you need to know." The tension between them was sharp, but underneath it was something else, a strange pull neither could explain. That night she stood on the balcony outside her room, watching the city lights below. The air was cool, the moon pale and uncertain. She thought of leaving, of disappearing before dawn, but something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way his voice sounded when he wasn't trying to be strong. Downstairs he stood in the garden smoking a cigarette. He didn't smoke often, only when memories became too loud. He saw her shadow above and called softly, "You should be asleep." "I can't," she said. "Your house is too quiet." He gave a faint smile. "Quiet is what most people want. Not me. Silence makes me remember." He looked up at her. "And what do you remember?" She hesitated. The sound of a heart that almost stopped beating. The man who almost didn't survive. He froze. Her words hit something inside him. "Where was that?" "In a hospital, by the docks," she said softly. "A long time ago." The night seemed to stop breathing. He extinguished the cigarette slowly. "What was his name?" "I never knew," she said. "He disappeared before morning." He took a step back, looking up at her again. The same rain that had soaked them once before began to fall lightly again. It was as if the sky itself recognized them. She stepped inside, unaware that below, the man she was speaking to had just realized the impossible truth that the woman standing on his balcony was the nurse who saved him from death. He sat on the cold stone bench, his hands trembling slightly. For years he had tried to erase that night, to bury the memory under power, control, and silence. But fate, in its cruel perfection, had brought her back into his house, unaware of what she meant to him. He whispered to himself, "You shouldn't be here." From the balcony, her voice drifted down through the rain. "Neither should I." Their words met halfway, dissolving into the sound of water and wind. Inside, he walked to the library, where the old piano stood untouched. His mother used to play it. He sat before it, pressing one key softly. The note echoed, fragile and pure. She heard it upstairs, closed her eyes, and let the music carry her back to the only moment of peace she remembered, holding a stranger's hand in a hospital bed, praying he'd survive. Downstairs, his hands trembled as he played, every note heavy with the memory of her voice saying, "Stay with me." He stopped playing and looked up at the ceiling, knowing she was listening. Sometimes silence reveals more than words ever could. And sometimes the most dangerous men are those who remember what it felt like to be saved. If you've ever felt that silence hides something deeper than it shows, share what you think people fear to say out loud. The following morning carried a strange calm. The sun filtered weakly through the curtain, touching the edge of her bed like a hesitant memory. She hadn't slept much. Every sound in that house carried weight, the ticking clock, the distant footsteps, the whispers of lives she didn't belong to. Downstairs, the mansion was alive again. Men in suits crossed hallways with folders in hand, maids hurried through side doors, and the faint hum of business hung in the air. She stayed at the top of the stairs, watching silently. It wasn't a home, she thought. It was a machine that ran on power and fear. The man, Rafael De Luca, though she didn't yet know his name, stood by the window of his office looking out over the courtyard. His reflection in the glass looked both alive and haunted. Behind him, Marco entered quietly, holding a tablet. "Boss, the security footage from last night," he said. "We reviewed the street cameras. Someone followed your car after you picked her up." De Luca turned slowly. "Who?" "We're still checking. Could be a rival family. Or police." His expression hardened. "Find out which." Marco hesitated. "And the woman? Should I run a background check now?" For a moment, De Luca didn't answer. His fingers tapped the glass rhythmically. "No, not yet. Sir, she's a stranger. If someone knows she's here—" "I said not yet," De Luca interrupted. Quieter this time, but final. Marco nodded, understanding that pressing further would be a mistake. He left, but not before glancing at the photograph on the shelf. De Luca's younger self, standing beside a man with sharp eyes and a scar along his jawline. The caption beneath it read, "R. De Luca and Antonio Rossi, 2014. She walked down the stairs then, her footsteps hesitant, her hair still damp from the shower. She wore simple clothes that the maid had given her, a light blouse and a beige skirt, too elegant for her old life, too modest for his world." He looked up when she entered. "You're awake." "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "You'll get used to the silence here." "Should I?" she asked softly. Or should I leave before it gets comfortable? He half smiled. If you plan to run, at least wait until the rain stops. She frowned slightly. You speak as if you'd stop me. Would you want me to? The question hung between them longer than it should have. She didn't answer. He turned back to the window, his tone changing. There's breakfast in the dining room. Eat before you go anywhere. She hesitated, then nodded. But as she turned to leave, she caught sight of something on the shelf. A photograph, faded but familiar. The young man in it was him, though the eyes were different, softer, innocent. Was this you? She asked. He glanced back. A long time ago? And the other man, his gaze darkened. Someone I trusted once. Not anymore? He gave no reply. The air grew heavy again. She left quietly, sensing she had touched a wound that still bled. Later that day, the mansion seemed to shift around her. The staff avoided her eyes. Whispers followed her in the hallways, and she began to understand what kind of man he was. One whose power didn't need to be spoken aloud. In the garden, she found the old gardener trimming roses. His hands were slow, his eyes kind. Good morning, she said gently. He smiled faintly. You're the guest the boss brought in from the rain. So everyone knows. Everyone sees. Few talk. She crouched beside him, watching him work. Do they fear him that much? The old man stopped cutting for a moment. They fear losing his protection more. She frowned. Protection from what? He looked up at her, eyes clouded with something ancient. From the world he built. She didn't know what to say. The truth was everywhere, yet invisible. Back inside, she walked past the library and paused at the door. Inside, DeLuca was speaking on the phone, voice low and restrained. Yes, no one touches them until I say so. If they move against us again, we'll answer differently. His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of threat. When he ended the call, he turned and saw her standing there. You shouldn't eavesdrop, he said quietly. I didn't mean to. He studied her for a long moment. You're not afraid of me. I should be, she said, but I'm not. Why? Because last night, when you looked at me in the rain, I saw fear in your eyes too. Maybe not for yourself, but for something you can't protect anymore. For a heartbeat, he froze. Few people ever dared to speak to him like that. He stepped closer. You see too much. Maybe you hide too much. He almost smiled. Almost. If you keep talking like that, someone might think you're trying to understand me. Maybe I am. Their eyes held, the distance between them shrinking like a secret ready to unfold. A knock on the door broke it. Marco entered again, holding a file. Boss, I found something. DeLuca turned sharply. What is it? Marco hesitated, looking at her. Maybe you want to see this alone. DeLuca gestured for him to continue. We traced the hospital records from the docs. There was an incident 5 years ago. Gunshot wound, male, identity unknown. The nurse in charge was named Lucia Moretti. The room went still. She froze. That name, that year. DeLuca didn't move, but his heartbeat roared in his chest. Show me. Marco handed him the tablet. The report appeared on the screen. A record of the night he almost died. The nurse's signature at the bottom. Lucia Moretti. She looked at him, her throat tightening. How do you have that? Marco blinked, confused. It's public record. Why? DeLuca's voice dropped. Leave us. When Marco was gone, the silence between them thickened. He set the tablet down slowly. Lucia Moretti. She looked away. You shouldn't know that name. I should have known it years ago. She shook her head. You were unconscious. You wouldn't have remembered. I did. I remembered your voice, your hands, the way you said, stay with me. Her breath caught. It was you. Yes. The word landed between them like thunder. He stepped closer, the mask he always wore cracking just enough for her to see the man beneath, the one she had once saved. I searched for you, he said quietly. After I woke up, I went back to the hospital, but it was gone, closed. No one knew your name. I left, she whispered. They said the man I saved was a criminal, that helping you made me a traitor. I lost everything. His expression changed, guilt, anger, disbelief blending into something human. You lost your life because of me. I didn't save you to lose mine, she said softly. I saved you because someone had to. The air trembled between them. For years, both had carried ghosts of that night. He, the memory of her voice. She, the weight of what it had cost. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Would it have changed anything? Yes, he said, everything. For the first time since she met him, his voice broke slightly, like a note played too long on a fragile string. She stepped back, overwhelmed. I shouldn't be here, but you are. He moved closer, slow, deliberate, not threatening, almost pleading. You're the only part of my past that didn't bleed. Don't run from it now. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't belong in your world. He shook his head. You were the only one who ever stepped into it without fear. The moment was fragile, the kind that doesn't last long, and it didn't. A sudden noise echoed outside, the sound of breaking glass, shouts, footsteps running across marble. DeLuca turned instantly. Stay here. Before she could speak, he was gone, his voice barking orders down the hallway. Through the open door she saw his men rushing toward the back entrance, guns drawn, shadows slicing through the sunlight. The peace of the morning shattered. She stood frozen, heart pounding. The illusion of safety crumbled around her. In the chaos, one thought echoed in her mind. You can't save the same man twice. And yet, as she heard him shout her name from somewhere in the hall, she realized she would try anyway. Because some lives are meant to cross again, not to repeat the past, but to finish what was left undone. If you've ever met someone who reappeared in your life just when you thought the story was over, share what you think the universe was trying to tell you. The house was chaos. The sound of boots echoed through the marble halls. Radios crackled and orders flew through the air like bullets. She stood frozen at the top of the stairs, watching the world beneath her unravel. Men rushed through the corridors with weapons drawn. The calm that had wrapped the mansion like a veil was gone, replaced by the cold pulse of danger. Rafael de Luca moved with precision, his expression unreadable, every step controlled. He was no longer the quiet man who had spoken to her about rain and silence. He was something else entirely, something she recognized only from stories whispered about powerful men who ruled cities from the shadows. Secure the east wing, he ordered. No one gets in or out. Yes, boss. He glanced up toward the balcony. She stood there, pale and trembling, holding onto the railing. Stay there, he called out. Don't move until I say it's safe. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe his voice could protect her, the way it had once pleaded for life in a dim hospital room. But fear had its own memory. A gunshot cracked through the air. She flinched. Men shouted in Italian. Somewhere, glass shattered again. De Luca's hand went instinctively to his holster. He turned to Marco. Who was it? Looks like a warning, boss. A message. From whom? Marco hesitated. Rosi's people. They know she's here. De Luca's eyes darkened, his pulse tightening. How? I don't know. But they said something about the girl, the one who saved you. He froze. The world seemed to narrow into a single point. Get her out of sight, he said. Now. But when he turned toward the stairs, she was gone. He cursed under his breath, running through the corridor. Lucia! Her name echoed through the mansion like a ghost he couldn't find. She had slipped out through the side hall, trying to make sense of the chaos. Her only thought was to escape, to breathe, to find a door that didn't lead deeper into danger. But this house was a maze, and fate was faster than fear. She found herself in a dim hallway lined with portraits, the storm outside painting streaks of light on the walls. At the far end, a door stood open, a storage room, empty except for an old piano covered in dust. She hid inside, heart pounding. Down the hall, footsteps approached, voices murmured in Italian. Find her. The boss wants her alive. Alive. The word chilled her. The door opened and a man stepped in. He wasn't De Luca. His eyes were cold, his smile cruel. "Lucia Moretti," he said, pronouncing her name perfectly. "You should have stayed away from him." She backed away, breath shallow. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what kind of man you saved." Before she could speak, he grabbed her arm. She tried to fight, but he was stronger. The struggle sent the old piano bench crashing to the floor. Then another sound. A click. Metal against metal. "Let her go." Raphael stood at the doorway, gun raised, eyes locked on the intruder. The man laughed softly. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Let her go, Antonio." Antonio Rossi, the man from the photograph. "You still think you can protect anyone?" Rossi sneered. "You couldn't even protect your mother. You let her die because of me, remember?" Raphael's jaw tightened. "This isn't about her." "It's always been about her," Rossi snapped. "And now it's about this woman too. The one who saw something worth saving in a monster like you." Lucia's breath caught. "You were friends," she whispered. "Brothers," Rossi corrected, "until he betrayed me." Raphael didn't move. "You killed our people. You stole from the family. What I did to survive. And what about her?" Rossi's gun shifted slightly toward Lucia. "Does she know what you've done? How many graves carry your name?" Raphael's voice dropped, almost calm. "If you hurt her, you'll join them." Rossi smirked. "You can't kill me. Not again." The two men stared at each other, years of history burning between them. Then chaos returned. A gunshot. The room exploded with sound. Lucia fell to the ground, covering her ears. Dust filled the air. When the echo faded, Rossi was gone, and Raphael stood by the wall, breathing hard, the gun still smoking. He looked at her, his eyes wide with something she hadn't seen before. Terror. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, trembling. "No." He lowered the gun and knelt beside her. His hands, once instruments of violence, trembled as they brushed her hair away from her face. "I told you to stay upstairs. You said you'd make it safe." "I tried." There was no victory in his voice, only exhaustion. She looked at the gun still in his hand. "You said you fix what others break, but you break things too, don't you?" He closed his eyes. "Every day." For a long moment, they sat there in silence, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the echo of what couldn't be undone. Then, softly, she asked, "Who was he?" "Someone who taught me everything," he said quietly, "including how to destroy what I love." She wanted to ask more, but his face said enough. Later, when the mansion had gone quiet again, Raphael sat in the library, a drink untouched beside him. The night stretched endlessly outside, and the fire crackled low. Lucia sat across from him, the bandage on her arm faintly visible. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" she asked. "Because some truths don't save anyone," he said. "They only bury them deeper. But hiding doesn't erase what happened." "No," he said. "But it lets you breathe for one more day." She looked at him, seeing the weariness beneath the strength. The man the world feared was still human, and that frightened her more than his gun ever could. "Raphael," she said softly, testing the name for the first time. "Why do they want me?" He looked up. "Because you remind them that I once had a soul." She didn't know what to say. The room seemed smaller, the firelight flickering like a heartbeat. Finally, she whispered, "You can't live in war forever." He met her eyes. "Then teach me how to stop fighting." She stood and walked to the window, her reflection merging with his in the glass. "I can't fix what's broken inside you," she said. "But maybe I can show you what still works." He watched her, silent. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. In that fragile stillness, the truth stood between them, ugly, unspoken, and strangely freeing. Outside, the rain began again, soft and cleansing, and deep down both knew that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was still coming. If you believe that even the most broken souls can find light again, tell what you think redemption truly means. Days passed in quiet tension. The mansion that once felt like a fortress now felt like a cage filled with ghosts that refused to leave. Outside, the rain fell every night, as if the sky itself was mourning something it couldn't name. Lucia spent her mornings in the garden, tending to the roses with the old gardener. She found peace in silence, in small acts of care that didn't require words. He watched her from the window sometimes, his world of violence and order quietly colliding with hers. She didn't ask what business he handled behind those locked doors, and he didn't ask why she stayed, even when she could have left. At night, they crossed paths in the long corridors, exchanging quiet glances that carried more truth than either dared to speak. One evening she found him in the study, reading a letter by the dim light of a lamp. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie loosened, the weight of command slipping from his shoulders for a moment. "Bad news?" she asked gently. He folded the letter. "There's no good news in my world." "Then maybe you need a different one." He looked up, the faintest ghost of a smile on his lips. "And where would I find that?" "Maybe it's already here," she said, nodding toward the garden outside. "You just stopped looking." He didn't reply, but she could see the thought linger in his eyes. Later that night, she brought him tea. The storm outside painted shifting patterns of light across his face. "You don't have to stay up," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." "What kind?" "The kind that remind me how much we waste running from who we used to be." He studied her, the softness in her words disarming him more than any weapon ever could. "You really believe people can change?" "I believe people can remember who they were before the world told them to forget." He looked down, his thumb tracing the edge of his glass. "Then maybe I've forgotten too much." "Maybe not," she said quietly. "Maybe you just need someone to remind you." The silence between them deepened, not heavy, but fragile, like the pause between heartbeats. The thunder rolled again outside. She stood to leave, but he stopped her with a single question. "Lucia," he said, voice low, "why did you save me that night?" She froze. "Because you were dying." "That's not an answer." She met his eyes. "Maybe it's the only one that matters." He nodded slowly. "And if you had known who I was, what I was, would you still have done it?" She hesitated. "Yes, because that night you weren't a name. You were a man who wanted to live." He exhaled, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "I've spent years wondering why you didn't let me die." "Maybe death wasn't supposed to be your punishment," she said softly. "Maybe living was." Her words hit something deep inside him, something no bullet or betrayal ever had. The rain grew heavier, washing against the windows like an unspoken confession. He stood, walking toward the glass. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't found you that night in the rain?" She joined him by the window. "I would still be lost, just somewhere else. And me," she looked at him, "you would still be dead, just in a different way." He turned to her, the distance between them barely a breath. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said. "I'm not offering it." "Then what is this?" She met his gaze steadily. "Understanding." The word lingered in the air like something sacred. He reached out then, hesitantly, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You shouldn't try to understand a man like me." "Too late," she whispered. They stood there, the thunder a distant heartbeat to the silence that wrapped around them. But peace never stayed long in his world. The next day, news came that one of his warehouses had been raided. His men whispered that Rossi's people were moving faster, bolder. Lucia overheard Marco in the corridor. "He's losing control. They're coming for him. And they know she's his weakness." Weakness. The word cut through her like a blade. That night she found Raphael outside, leaning against the black car parked by the gate. He looked different under the streetlight. Less untouchable, more human. "You heard," he said quietly. "Yes." He didn't deny it. "They'll come again. They always do." "And you'll fight again?" He gave a humorless smile. "It's what I know." "Then you'll die for it. Maybe that's what men like me are meant for." "No," she said firmly. "That's what broken boys believe before someone teaches them otherwise." He looked at her, surprised by the sharpness in her tone. "You think I can change?" "I think you already started the moment you let me in." He fell silent. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed faintly. She took a deep breath. If you want peace, you'll have to give something up. What? Control. He laughed quietly, bitterly. That's the one thing I've never been allowed to lose. Then maybe it's the only thing you need to. Her voice softened. You can build a world out of fear, Raphael, but you can't live in it. He didn't answer, but the silence was full of questions. Finally, he said, Why do you care what happens to me? Because I've seen you when no one else has, and I know the man who begged to live is still inside you. He looked at her as if the world had tilted. You talk like you still believe in miracles. Maybe I do. Maybe you're one. He turned away before she could see the emotion in his face. Go inside, Lucia. Promise me something first. What? When the storm comes again, don't face it alone. He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. I'll try. She smiled faintly. Trying is how redemption begins. When she walked back toward the house, the light rain began to fall once more. Raphael watched her disappear through the doorway, his reflection blurring in the wet glass of the car. Inside, he whispered to himself, her world doesn't belong to mine. But deep down, he feared the truth that maybe it always had. If you believe that two people from different worlds can still change each other, even when everything says they shouldn't, share what you think real transformation requires. The calm that followed didn't last. It never did in his world. For a few days, the house felt lighter, quieter, almost peaceful. Lucia smiled more often, and even the staff seemed to breathe without fear. But Raphael knew peace was just the pause between storms. One evening, he stood in the library staring at the flickering fire. The flames reflected in his glass as Marco entered, face tense. They found another body, he said quietly, near the docks. Raphael didn't turn. Whose? Someone from your crew. Rossi's men left a message. What message? Marco handed him a folded piece of paper. It was simple. 5 words scrawled in red ink. We know where she is. Raphael's jaw tightened. He crumpled the paper in his hand, the sound sharp against the silence. She's not to leave the house, he said. Boss, that'll make her a target. She already is, he interrupted. Lucia appeared at the doorway, her voice quiet but steady. What's happening? Both men froze. She stepped closer, the light from the fire soft on her face. Raphael met her gaze. Nothing you need to worry about. That's not true, she said. It's always about me now, isn't it? He exhaled. They're coming for you. Because of me. Then let me go. If I'm gone, they'll stop. No. Her tone sharpened. You can't keep me locked here. I'm not locking you. I'm keeping you alive. And who keeps you alive? He turned away. The question hit harder than any bullet. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the room felt like it carried eyes. Every sound reminded her that safety was an illusion. She thought about leaving, just walking out into the night again, like before. But she knew he would follow. In the middle of the night, she found him in the garage, loading a gun into his car. You're going after them, she said. He didn't look at her. It ends tonight. You can't fight every ghost that haunts you. I can try. She stepped closer. You think killing him will save you? I think it's the only language men like Rosie understand. And what language do you understand, Raphael? He paused. Loss. The honesty in that word broke something inside her. She reached for his hand, stopping him. If you walk out that door, you'll lose more than you already have. I've already lost everything. Not everything, she whispered. He finally looked at her. The distance between them vanished in a breath. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence said what fear wouldn't allow. Then softly, she said, You once told me some prisons have golden walls. Maybe tonight you can leave one. He almost smiled, the kind that hurts more than it heals. If I don't come back, don't finish that. He hesitated, then nodded. Stay inside. Promise me. I promise nothing, she said, because if you don't return, I'll find you. He stared at her, and for the first time in years, someone's faith frightened him more than any enemy ever could. When he left, she waited by the window, counting the minutes in silence. Hours passed. The storm began again. rain pounding against the glass, thunder rolling over the sea. Then, lights in the distance, sirens, the sound of engines. She ran down the stairs, heart in her throat. Marco met her at the door. "He said you had to stay." "Move," she said. "I'm not waiting for death to knock politely." Against his better judgment, he followed her. The docks were a chaos of light and shadow. Men shouted, gunfire cracked through the air, the smell of smoke thick and sharp. Lucia ran between the containers, searching for him. She saw him then, Raphael, pinned behind a wall, exchanging fire with Rossi's men. His coat was torn, his shoulder bleeding, but he moved like a man who had stopped fearing pain. "Raphael!" she screamed. He turned. The moment their eyes met, he froze, and in that split second of distraction, Rossi emerged from the shadows. "Still saving strays, De Luca?" Rosie sneered, gun aimed at his chest. Raphael's hand went for his weapon, but Lucia was faster. She ran forward, slamming into Rosie with all her strength. The gun went off. The sound tore through the rain. Rosie fell. So did Lucia. Raphael caught her before she hit the ground, his hands stained with rain and blood. "Lucia, no." She looked up at him, her voice faint. "You said you fix what others break." "Not like this," he whispered, pressing his hand against the wound. "Stay with me." Her eyes fluttered. "I already did once." He choked on the words he couldn't say. "You're not dying here." "Not again." Sirens drew closer. Rossi's men scattered. He carried her to the car, his breath heavy, his heart louder than the storm. Marco drove, the road a blur of rain and fear. Inside the car, Lucia's voice trembled. "Promise me something. Anything. When it stops raining, don't live in war anymore." He swallowed. "I'll try." Her hand fell limp in his. The silence after that was unbearable. When they reached the mansion, doctors waited at the gate. They took her inside. He followed, silent, drenched, hollow. Hours passed. The house that once echoed with violence was now filled with the fragile rhythm of machines and whispered prayers. When the doctor finally emerged, his face was unreadable. "She'll live," he said, "but barely." Raphael didn't answer. He simply walked to her room, where she lay pale and still, the stormlight falling across her face. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "I told you not to follow me," he whispered. Her eyes didn't open, but her lips moved faintly. "You would have done the same." He laughed softly, brokenly. "You're right." The rain outside began to fade. Dawn crept slowly across the horizon, pale and quiet. He stayed there until the first light touched her skin. For the first time in years he prayed, not for power or revenge, but for forgiveness he didn't deserve. Sometimes the people we try to protect end up saving us instead. And sometimes redemption doesn't arrive as a miracle. It arrives bleeding, but alive. If you've ever tried to protect someone and realized they were the reason you changed, share what that moment meant to you. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of the monitor and the steady rhythm of rain outside. Lucia's face was pale against the white sheets, her breath shallow but even. Raphael sat beside her, unmoving, a shadow carved by guilt and devotion. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her fall again. The sound of the gunshot, the red on her hands, the way her voice broke when she said, "You fix what others break." Marco entered quietly, setting a cup of coffee on the table. "She's stable." The doctor said the bullet missed anything vital. Raphael nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Good. But, boss, the police are asking questions about the shooting, about the docks. They won't get answers. They might if Rossi's people talk." Raphael looked up, his eyes sharp. "Then they won't talk." Marco hesitated. "There's something else. A journalist's been asking about her. Says she knows Lucia Moretti's past. That she used to work for a medical charity. The one that treated wounded men from both sides during the Palermo War." Raphael froze. The memory hit him like a blade. The same hospital, the same night. He stood abruptly. "Find out what she knows. and make sure it never reaches her." When Marco left, the silence swallowed him again. Lucia stirred in the bed. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, adjusting to the dim light. When she saw him there, she smiled faintly. "You didn't leave. I told you I wouldn't. You look tired." He almost laughed. "That's new." Her smile faded. "How long have I been here?" 2 days. "And Rossi?" "Gone. For now." Her eyes searched his. "What aren't you telling me?" He looked away. "You need to rest. I need the truth." He sighed. "The truth is the world I built is falling apart, and you were never meant to be part of it." "Then why did you bring me in?" "Because the night I found you in the rain, I didn't care about surviving anymore, but you looked at me like I could still be human." She reached for his hand. "And what do you see now?" He hesitated. "Something I don't deserve." The room fell silent again. Outside, the rain softened into a steady whisper. Later, when she was asleep, he walked to the window. The city lights blurred through the glass, each one a confession he'd never make. He whispered to no one, "You shouldn't have saved me." But behind him, her voice came weak but clear. "If I hadn't, who would have saved me?" He turned. She was awake, eyes open, fragile but fierce. "You think you're the only one who died that night," she said softly. "When I found you bleeding on that floor, I lost everything too. My job, my reputation, my faith. But I never regretted saving you." He moved closer, unable to look away. "Why not?" "Because even in your worst, you wanted to live, and that's something I understood too well." He sank into the chair beside her. "You don't know everything I've done." "Then tell me." The words lingered in the air. He stared at his hands, the veins visible, the skin marked by scars that no longer had stories worth telling. "I built an empire out of revenge. Rossi was my brother. We grew up on the same streets under the same roof. He taught me how to fight, how to take what we were never given. But power doesn't share a home. One day, I looked at him and saw what I could become if I didn't stop him. So I pulled the trigger first." Lucia didn't flinch. Her gaze held steady, compassionate, unwavering. "You killed him," she said. "I tried," he replied. "But he survived. And every day since then I've been waiting for him to finish what I started." She closed her eyes, her voice a whisper. "No one wins in that kind of war." "I know. But knowing doesn't make it stop." They sat in silence, two broken souls in a world built on vengeance. After a while, "Maybe it's not about stopping it. Maybe it's about walking away before it consumes what's left." He gave a hollow smile. "And go where? Men like me don't get to start over." "Then prove that wrong," she said, gripping his hand. "If not for you, then for me." He looked at her, the storm of his past meeting the calm of her eyes. "You'd forgive someone like me?" he asked quietly. "I already did," she said. "The moment I saw you bleeding and still fighting to live, I forgave whatever brought you there." Tears burned at the edges of his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. "You don't even know who you're forgiving. I know enough. And I know that if the world made you cruel, it can also make you kind again." The room felt smaller, warmer, filled with something he hadn't felt in years, hope disguised as grace. But fate, as always, listened too closely. Outside the hospital, a black car stopped at the corner. 2 men stepped out, lighting cigarettes under the rain. "Are we sure she's here?" one asked. "Yeah," the other replied. "And the boss wants her alive this time." Inside, Lucia shivered, as if her body already knew what was coming. Raphael stood, alert, instinct taking over. He walked to the window and saw them before they could hide their faces. "Get down," he said sharply. "What is it?" "Rossi's men." Her pulse quickened. "They found us?" He nodded. "They always do." He reached into his coat, checking his weapon. "Stay behind me. I'm not leaving you again." "You're not leaving at all," he said. The door downstairs creaked open. Boots on tile. Voices low, deliberate. Raphael turned to her. "If something happens," she interrupted. "Don't say it. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't let this be how it ends." The footsteps grew closer. He took a breath, steadying himself. "It won't." The door burst open. Gunfire lit the room like lightning. He moved fast, silent, precise. 2 men down before they reached the bed. The third fired blindly, shattering the IV stand. Lucia screamed. Raphael tackled him, the sound of struggle sharp and desperate. Then silence. When she opened her eyes, Raphael was on the floor, the other man gone. Blood stained his shirt. She fell to her knees beside him. No, no, no. He looked up at her, the faintest smile on his lips. I told you, I fix what others break. Don't you dare say goodbye. I'm not. His hand brushed her cheek weakly. I'm saying thank you. For what? For reminding me that I was once a man worth saving. His hand fell away, heavy and still. Outside, the sirens grew louder again. Lucia pressed her forehead to his, whispering through tears, You can't die twice, Raphael. Not when I just learned to live again. But the world doesn't always wait for miracles. If you've ever loved someone who tried to protect you more than themselves, share what that love taught you about pain, loyalty, and forgiveness. They said he wouldn't survive the night. The bullet had missed his heart by less than an inch, but the damage was deep, the loss of blood relentless. When they rushed him into surgery, Lucia refused to leave the hallway. The nurses tried to move her away, but she stood there, soaked in tears and silence, hands trembling as she clung to the cross around her neck. Hours passed like years. The corridor was dim, the fluorescent light flickering above her like the pulse of hope that refused to die. At dawn, the doctor finally emerged, his face unreadable. He's alive, he said, for now. Her knees gave out. Relief hit her like pain. Inside the room, Raphael looked nothing like the man who once ruled a city. Pale, weak, stripped of the armor that had made him untouchable. Tubes and wires replaced his weapons. The steady hum of the machines now the only rhythm keeping him alive. Lucia sat beside him, her hand resting gently over his. You fix what others break, she whispered. But who fixes? He didn't answer. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, but his fingers moved faintly, as if reaching for her voice in the dark. She stayed through the morning, through the afternoon, through the endless hours of not knowing. Marco came later that day, his face heavy with guilt. The men who did this, they're gone, he said quietly. But so is the peace. Lucia didn't look at him. Peace never belonged to this house. He sighed. You should rest. I'll rest when he does. Marco hesitated. If he wakes up. When he wakes up, she corrected. What then? Do you think he can just walk away from this life? She looked up, eyes sharp with a faith that had nothing to do with religion. If he can walk, he can change. Marco didn't argue. He simply nodded and left her with the man who had been both her curse and her redemption. By nightfall, she fell asleep with her head resting against his arm. When Raphael finally opened his eyes, the room was quiet, and the first thing he saw was her. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. The pain in his chest told him otherwise. Lucia, he murmured, his voice barely there. Her eyes opened instantly. You're here. I was afraid. So was I. He tried to sit up, but the pain forced him back. She reached out, steadying him. You need to rest. I can't. There are things I need to say. Then say them. He took a slow breath. When I saw you fall, I thought that was my punishment, to lose the only thing I never meant to love. Her eyes filled with tears. You think love is punishment? For men like me it is. No, she said softly. For men like you, love is the only thing that still saves. He looked at her, really looked, and for once didn't hide behind silence. I spent my life destroying anything that made me feel human. You walked in and ruined that. Good, she said, almost smiling through the tears. Someone had to. The faintest laugh escaped his throat, rough and broken. You're not afraid anymore. I am, she whispered, but I'm more afraid of losing what's left of you. He closed his eyes, the weight of her words settling deep. I don't deserve. Then earn it, she said. Live differently. For once, stop fighting ghosts. Her hand lingered over his. His fingers tightened weakly around hers. You make it sound easy. It's not, but it's possible. For a while, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty this time. It was alive, fragile, like a heartbeat shared between them. Outside, The rain began again, gentle now, almost forgiving. In the days that followed, Raphael slowly recovered. The wounds healed, but the guilt remained. Sometimes she caught him staring out the window, his eyes distant, as if watching a life he could no longer return to. One morning he asked, "Do you think people can really change?" She looked up from the chair by his bed. "Not overnight, but they can choose to stop being what hurt them. And what if I don't know how?" "Then start by not pretending anymore." He looked at her, as if hearing something he'd been waiting for all his life. Later, she took him outside to the garden. The sunlight fell through the branches, touching his face with warmth he hadn't felt in years. "This doesn't feel real," he said. "That's because it's peace," she replied. "You're not used to it." He smiled faintly. "Maybe peace is just another kind of pain." "Then learn to live with it," she said. He turned to her. "What about you? What happens when I walk away from this world?" "I'll follow," she said simply. "Not because I belong to it, but because I belong to you." He shook his head, emotion breaking through the cracks of his restraint. "You deserve better than me." "Then be better." The words cut through the air with quiet power. That night, when the house was still and the city lights glowed like distant memories, Raphael walked to the mirror. The reflection staring back at him looked older, emptier, but there was something new in his eyes, something fragile, like forgiveness trying to find its way in. He whispered to his reflection, "You don't have to be who they made you." Behind him, Lucia's voice filled the room softly, "Then stop being him." He turned. She stood in the doorway, wearing the same calm that once saved his life. "You were awake," he said. "I couldn't sleep." "Why?" "Because every time it rains I remember the man I pulled from the dark." He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "And now? Now I see the man trying to walk out of it." He reached for her, pulling her close. "Stay with me, Lucia." "I will," she said, resting her head against his chest. "As long as you keep choosing life over guilt." Outside, the rain began to fade, leaving only silence. And for the first time in a long time, silence didn't sound like punishment. It sounded like peace. If you've ever tried to rebuild yourself after carrying guilt for too long, share what helped you start again. Sometimes redemption begins in the quiet moments when no one is watching. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, time didn't feel like a countdown. The air around the mansion changed. It no longer smelled of gunpowder and fear, but of roses and quiet rain. Lucia moved through the house like sunlight filtering through dark curtains, slowly erasing the shadows he once lived in. Raphael could walk again, though every step still carried the memory of pain. He didn't speak much those days. Instead, he listened to her voice, to the sound of the wind, to a silence that no longer felt like punishment. One morning, she found him sitting in the library, holding an envelope. His hands were steady, but his eyes weren't. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up, the morning light softening the scars on his face. "It's my confession." She frowned. "Confession?" "I wrote down everything. Every name, every deal, every secret that kept me alive and kept others buried. If I hand this over to the police, Rossie's network collapses. Mine too." Her eyes widened. "You'd destroy everything you built." He nodded. "It's the only way to end it, for good." She took a step closer. "They'll come for you." "I know." "They'll kill you." "I know that too." She stared at him, her voice breaking. "Then why do it?" He looked at her, and for once there was no mask, no armor, just truth. "Because if I die without changing, then every life I took will stay on me forever. But if I end this, maybe I can die clean." Tears filled her eyes. "And what about me?" "You live," he said simply. "You live free." "No," she whispered. "I don't want freedom without you." He smiled faintly. "Then you don't understand what freedom really means." She knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. "Raphael, I saved your life once. Don't ask me to lose it now." He looked down at their joined hands. "You didn't save me from death, Lucia. You saved me from being dead while alive. That's different." She shook her head. You can still choose life. I am. This is my choice. She stood, pacing the room. There has to be another way. There isn't. He set the envelope on the table. It looked small, ordinary, like something incapable of destroying empires. But inside it was everything. His sins, his power, his name. Once I send this, there's no turning back, he said. Then don't send it, she pleaded. He rose slowly, each step toward her deliberate. Lucia, you taught me that love isn't about keeping. It's about freeing. Maybe this is how I free us both. She closed her eyes, tears falling silently. If you do this, I'll never see you again. He reached out, touching her face gently. If this world was fair, that wouldn't be true. The next morning, he was gone. Marco found the envelope missing and the car tracks leading toward the city. Lucia stood by the window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. She didn't cry this time. She just whispered, "He made his choice." Hours later, news broke. A massive leak of documents had exposed one of Italy's most powerful criminal networks. The De Luca and Rossi families, names that once ruled fear, were dismantled overnight. Dozens arrested, millions seized. But there was no mention of Raphael. He vanished. Days turned into weeks. No word, no body, no sign. The police assumed he fled or died. Lucia refused both. One evening, as the sun fell over the horizon, she walked to the garden where he used to stand smoking, staring at the rain. She sat on the same stone bench, the air cool and quiet. She closed her eyes and spoke softly to the wind. "You said peace was another kind of pain. I think I understand now." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint smell of tobacco and rain. She smiled. "You're still here, aren't you?" A single white rose had grown by the edge of the path, new, delicate, alive. She reached out, touching its petals. "You fixed what was broken, even if it cost you everything." Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone with something pure, acceptance. That night she returned to the city. She reopened her small clinic near the docks, the same place where she once saved a stranger's life. But now she carried his name in silence like a prayer. Every person she treated, every wound she cleaned, every hand she held, it was his redemption continuing through hers. Sometimes she'd pause at the window, watching the rain, whispering to no one, "You lived, Raphael, even if the world doesn't know it." And maybe somewhere, in a distant city, he did. A man with quiet eyes, sitting at a cafe near the sea, watching strangers pass. A faint scar on his shoulder, a newspaper headline folded beside him. He didn't need to read it. He already knew how the story ended. Because sometimes redemption isn't about starting over. It's about disappearing quietly, knowing you finally became what someone believed you could be. If you've ever had to let someone go so they could heal, share what that goodbye taught you about love that sets free. The years that followed carried a silence she learned to live with. Lucia never returned to the mansion. It stood there, abandoned and overgrown, a monument to everything that once ruled fear and fire. The city moved on, pretending it had forgotten the names whispered in the dark. But memory never disappears. It just learns to breathe quietly. Her clinic became her world, small, modest, but full of people who came not for luxury, but for life. She worked long days and longer nights, and sometimes when she was alone cleaning the floors or closing the doors, she would whisper his name, not in grief, but in gratitude. Raphael. The sound of it no longer hurt. It was a prayer now. One winter morning, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the paper worn, the edges salt-stained as if it had traveled across seas. Inside, there was no signature, just a few lines written in steady ink. "The sea is calm here. I build boats now, not empires. Some nights I still dream of rain, but it no longer feels like punishment. It feels like memory. If you ever stand by the water, you'll understand." Below the words, a pressed white rose was folded inside the page. Her hands trembled as she touched it, not because she was surprised, but because she had always known. That day, she closed the clinic early and walked to the pier. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds, the kind that promised rain but not destruction. She stood at the edge of the dock, the wind pulling gently at her hair. The sea stretched endlessly before her, vast and forgiving. She closed her eyes and let the air carry her back to the rain-soaked streets, to the night she found a stranger dying, to the man who would one day save her in ways he'd never understand. She whispered softly, "You found peace." And maybe, somewhere beyond the horizon, he heard her. Far away, in a quiet coastal village, a man sat by the shore repairing an old wooden boat. His hair was grayer now, his face older, but the eyes, the same ones that once held storms, had softened with time. He looked up as the rain began to fall, slow and gentle. He smiled, not because he missed her, but because he felt her. Sometimes love doesn't end. It just changes shape, turning from fire to light, from pain to peace, from presence to memory. Lucia returned home that night, soaked from the rain, but at peace. She placed the letter in a wooden box along with a single photograph, the only one she had of him. It wasn't a portrait. It was a blurred image, taken accidentally the night the clinic reopened. He was in the background, half-turned, unseen by everyone but her. That was enough. She lit a candle beside the window. The flame flickered softly, painting light across the rows pressed between the pages. She smiled. "You fixed what was broken, Raphael. Now I'll keep healing what's left." Outside, the rain finally stopped. Years passed, but the sea never forgot. On quiet nights, fishermen spoke of a man who lived by the coast, silent, kind, with eyes that seemed to hold both guilt and grace. He never told them his name, he never spoke of his past. But every evening, he left a white rose by the edge of the water before going home. No one knew why, and in another part of the world, in a small clinic by the docks, a woman did the same. Two souls connected not by distance, but by the quiet promise they once made, to choose life over guilt, to love without possession, to find peace after the storm. Theirs was not a story of perfect endings. It was a story of transformation, of two broken hearts learning that redemption isn't found in erasing the past, but in living differently because of it. If you've ever had to forgive someone who will never come back or learn to love through silence, share what that journey taught you about peace that doesn't need witness. Because some stories don't end when the curtain falls. They echo softly in the lives they change.